Hey guys, welcome to Y&R Daily Update YouTube channel. Today's topics: the day in Genoa City opens with a pressure drop that nobody notices until it is too late. On one side of town, a mother convinces herself she can outrun her history by steering a wounded man through a mess he mostly created. Across the city, a couple leans into calm domestic ritual, trying to hold stillness like a priceless vase. Between those poles, a quiet bench, melting gelato, and a handful of friends who realize grief is the only language they all still speak. Thread by thread, the fabric tightens until it snaps. Phyllis Summers decides yet again that she can outmaneuver gravity. Daniel has already tried the direct route. He laid out what he's seen and what he knows. Kane Ashby thrives in the shadows. Off-ledger favors, off-camera smiles, plans that sound cleaner than they are. He asks his mother to step away before the edges sharpen, but Phyllis treats warning like wind, something to brace against, not something to reroute for. If she can turn Kane's anger into momentum, if she can keep him busy, she tells herself she might even influence terms, blunt the harm, write a cleaner ending than the one he's plotting. She calls it strategy. Everyone who loves her calls it denial and designer clothes. Kane reads her optimism like a manual. He does not want a partner. He wants an instrument that can play on command. In Phyllis, he finds fluency, connections she can activate in 2 calls, rooms she can open with 1 smile, a genius for improvisation that makes Mises look like planned choreography. He uses that fluency to court alliances he cannot win directly, to pry Abbott and Newman fault lines to pressure Chancellor assets that were never his to touch. He tells Phyllis the pitch is mutual uplift. The footnotes say leverage, intimidation, and plausible deniability. When she hesitates at the tone of a meeting or the weight of a threat, he reframes it as urgency. When she proposes a safeguard, he tucks it neatly into a drawer he has no intention of opening. The Summers family senses the pattern before she admits it. Daniel watches his mother's language change. The way she starts defending decisions she didn't make. The way she claims responsibility for outcomes that only benefit Kane. He recognizes the old reflex to take chaos personally and then try to fix it alone. He also recognizes the danger. A man who builds pressure as a tactic will eventually need an explosion to make his point. Daniel begins to move like a chess player who can hear the clock. He maps exits, tests alibis, and collects receipts. Most of all, he prepares himself for the moment when persuasion fails and protection is all that's left. Meanwhile, in the wider orbit, life insists on absurd contrast. At the Abbott estate, Diane Jenkins stages an Italian evening for Jack, all amber light and Tuscan flourishes, a reminder that ordinary joy can be chosen on purpose. They talk about their grandson's imminent return and what it means to love a family that never stops multiplying its challenges. Jack suggests they make the most of the privacy while they have it. Diane agrees, gently steering conversation away from boardrooms and back to the soft margins where they are simply 2 people who survived enough storms to appreciate quiet. To an outsider, the rest of the evening might seem uneventful, even dull. To them, that is the whole point. Calm is not a filler between dramas. It is hard-won ground. Not far away, a different kind of quiet gathers. Tessa runs into Claire and buys 2 cups of gelato because cooling sweetness eases hard talk. They sit where they can see people without being seen. And in the low hum of the city, they compare losses. Claire is living inside the after-image of Cole. Everything familiar with a new outline. Tessa blends her apology for not reaching out sooner with the simple solidarity of showing up now. She understands the strange timeline of grief. She knows how days can expand and collapse in the same afternoon. When Claire asks about Mariah, Tessa answers with the kind of detail that makes absence bearable. What songs Mariah has been humming, which joke fell flat last week. The Little Ways love persists even when the world refuses to slow down. They do not trade slogans or platitudes. They share small proofs that life even today can carry a gentler shape. Holden eventually drifts into their orbit. One more person who has learned the cost of attachment by paying it. Daniel crosses paths there, too. And for a few minutes, these talk about loss the way sailors talk about currents, by pointing, by describing, by admitting what pulled hardest and what finally brought them back to shore. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. None of them are healed. Not in the complete way television sometimes promises. But they are less alone, and that counts. Back in the current of Kane's designs, the stakes climb. Deals harden into ultimatums. The favor that sounded like a phone call becomes a breadcrumb trail meant to frame arrival. A protective measure turns out to be a thin veil over illegal leverage. Phyllis feels the floor tilt. She tries to renegotiate to put guardrails on a plan that was built to ignore them. Kane does not accept revisions. He escalates. He arrives early to meetings and leaves late. He switches off the light to make a point. He opens doors without knocking to show that he can. Each small violation is a test. Each silence he extracts is a promise he intends to collect. It is Daniel who refuses the script. He stops appealing to Phyllis's competence and starts appealing to her clarity. He shows her where the path leads if she keeps walking it, not to a victorious headline, but to a scandal with her name on it, and Kane already rehearsing his statement of shock. She hears him at last. She hears him. The pivot comes not as a monologue, but as a decision made in a single steady inhale. She is done being useful to someone who is only dangerous. Kane anticipates withdrawal and meets it with force. He does not need to shout. The threat works better as temperature than as noise. He lays out a fictional version of events that makes Phyllis the architect of harm and himself the reluctant passenger. He threatens to clear the air with a list of carefully curated facts that would poison her reputation and cost her any leverage she has left. He moves closer to prove there is nowhere else for her to go. What happens next is both simple and McDaniel arrives at a bad time that turns out to be the only right time left. He steps between the threat and its target, not as a hero in a speech, but as a son who promised himself he would not be late again. His posture is not dramatic. It's deliberate. He understands that men like Kane push until they meet an immovable object. He intends to be one. The room compresses into 3 variables: proximity, pride, and the physics of fear. Kane reaches. Phyllis flinches. Daniel's hand moves. Afterward, people will argue about sequences and distances and what counts as immediate danger. In the moment, everything moves faster than words. A struggle begins at arm's length, becomes a tangle, breaks apart, and reforms with the table at an angle and a chair on its side. There is a flash of absolute stillness right before sound returns to the world like a slam door. Across town, Diane and Jack stack plates and argue gently over whether a sprig of basil qualifies as a centerpiece. Their predictability is bomb. At the park, Tessa and Claire finish the last spoonfuls of gelato before the humidity steals the rest. Holden mentions a memory, and all 3 laugh in that surprised way that grief allows when it's tired. These pockets of calm are not blind to danger. They are the reason to keep resisting it. Back in the contested room, the pivot from threat to consequence arrives the way a fault line gives way without warning. Then all at once, a shout sharpens into a command. A hand closes over arrest. For a heartbeat, the outcome could still change. Then the moment chooses the people in it. When the dust settles, because dust always settles. Even on days that end in sirens, there will be reports to write and statements to make. There will be people who claim they saw it coming and people who swear nobody could have predicted it. Jack and Diane will sit on the edge of their bed and wonder whether peace is ever more than a visitor. Tessa will text Mariah something soft and ordinary and true. Claire will stand up a little straighter and recognize that surviving loss teaches a person how to stay. Holden will consider whether love is worth its risks and decide again that the answer is yes. And Phyllis will finally refuse to carry the weight that does not belong to her. Whether Daniel had to pull a trigger or whether the night stopped 1 inch short of that line, those facts will take shape in the next slate of hours. The moral landscape, however, is already clear. A son stood where danger tried to live. A mother let the truth be heavier than pride. A man who mistook other people for tools learned abruptly that they are not. Genoa City will measure the fallout in headlines and whispers and the slow return of ordinary days. But beneath the counting there will be a quieter ledger. Who showed up? Who stood firm? Who chose tenderness when the air asked for violence? On that ledger, the city breaks even tonight, and that is a kind of victory. Genoa City loves a split screen. On one side of town, the Abbott estate glows with warm lamplight. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. The dining room transformed into a pocket of Tuscanoni that smells faintly of basil and lemon zest. On the other, an operation that Kane Ashby insists is not a company, not a campaign, but a train. Fast, loud, and mercilessly on schedule, barrels through the evening. Somewhere between those tracks, Phyllis Summers decides to step aboard with a smile, a story, and a bottle of contraband. Phyllis arrives to Kane's domain the way she prefers to meet danger, with her chin up and her hands full. The bottle she's carrying is a vintage he once bragged about. lifted with exquisite audacity from the stone and ivy castle he keeps for clients and secrets. It's a provocation dressed as a peace offering, a message in glass that says, I can go where you think I won't. In her world, leverage sometimes looks like a gift. Kane is in no mood to unwrap anything. His calls to the twins have funneled into silence. No texts, no returned pings, just the flat, infuriating absence of a reply. Panic in a man like Kane never presents as panic. It arises rage at the nearest movable object. Tonight, the nearest object happens to be Phyllis, smiling, at the edge of his control room with a bottle worth a small negotiation and a look that suggests she already knows he will try to push her away. You don't have to celebrate, she says, before he can weaponize the air, but you do have to breathe. She sets the bottle down as if she's putting down a flare in the dark. If he wants to blow out the light, he'll have to do it deliberately. His answer is a stare that could sand a floor. He gestures at the phone on the table. The message threads that end with blue bubbles and no gray ones. Do you hear a party? The train is moving and he's counting the cars. Phyllis steps closer to the edge but not over it. She has rehearsed this and knows where the sharp corners live. She talks about the way people disappear when they need to. How grief, pride, and fear can turn even the most devoted child into a ghost. She does it without turning the conversation into a lecture about her own past. But the implication is there, for anyone who's paid attention. Once upon a time, the world believed Phyllis had vanished. What brought her back was not a press conference, but a pair of stubborn, loving children who refused to accept the worst ending. People revive, she says softly. Even families. Kane narrows his eyes. He hears the pitch underneath the empathy, and bristles at the possibility that she's selling hope as a holding pattern. But Phyllis isn't done. She folds in a second thread. News that the Newmans have started watching the horizon. Nick of all people has floated the idea of an alliance with Kane. Phyllis reports this as a fact, not a favor. It means the power map is shifting. It means people who didn't used to flinch at the name Ashby are now calculating, edging closer to his fire to warm their hands. When the Newmans worry, she says, the rest of the city starts listening. The effect is immediate and complicated. On the one hand, Kane loves the leverage it implies. On the other, he hates being studied. If Nick wants a coalition, it's because Nick expects a war. And if he expects a war, he also expects to control the peace. Kane has no intention of being anyone's decorated envoy. Phyllis, sensing the ground stiffen, adds a third point, one that will either humanize her or detonate the room. There's something I should say, she begins. And Kane's jaw tightens because that phrase has never delivered anything he wants to hear. He leaps to the conclusion most comfortable for a man who treats trust like a kind of currency only he should. Mint, who did you betray me with? The question is half a snarl, half a test. She holds her place. No one. The secret, it turns out, is as small as it is sharp. While passing through society, she overheard Lily. Just a sliver of a call. A few words bent by the clatter of silverware. Nothing operational, nothing she can weaponize. Just a tone that suggested that Lily's patience has limits and that whatever this is with Kane, she intends to define her own terms. Phyllis's point in sharing isn't to push a wedge deeper. It's to explain why she came at all. She thinks he's isolated himself into a corner and wanted, if nothing else, to interrupt that spiral. I thought you might need a person, she says, risking a hand to his shoulder. It lands badly. Kane flinches, not violently, but with the reflex of someone who cannot afford softness in the center of a hard night. The moment goes awkward and long. Phyllis reads it correctly and starts to step back to leave him to his trains and his unread messages. For a breath, that's the end of the scene. Wait, the word is not kind, but it is not cruel either. Kane catches her exit with a palm open instead of a fist. There is something like appreciation in his voice when he says they are built alike. Subscribe our channel for more latest update. Both wired for velocity. Both willing to climb ladders that aren't designed to hold them. It is the closest he will come to calling her brave. And then he draws the line that matters. We are not partners, he tells her. And the language is deliberate, shorn of metaphors. You are not my queen. Whatever throne Kane imagines himself sitting upon at the end of this ride, he intends to sit alone. He isn't looking for a coiler, a cosigner, or a conscience. He is at most willing to accept a mirror that reflects the parts he likes to see. The rest, hesitation, vulnerability, a hand on a shoulder, has no place on the manifest. Phyllis, for once, does not argue with the architecture of another person's boundary. She nods, not as capitulation, but as acknowledgement. If respect is the only drink on offer, she can lift a glass to it without confusing its taste for trust. To mutual admiration, she says, and for an instant, the corner of Kane's mouth plays at a smile that doesn't fully arrive. The toast is not affection, it is a treaty with a single clause. Neither will try to rename what this is, while that temporary peace holds. The camera cuts to Abbott Manor, where Diane Jenkins Abbott is finishing her Italian Coupe theater. She has curated a night that resists the city's appetite for spectacle. Fresh pasta rolled on a marble board. She doesn't mind scratching. A Chianti that breathes like a secret you can finally say aloud. An old vinyl spinning a Dean Martin track that refuses to be hip and is therefore perfect. Jack arrives to find the dining room transformed into a courtyard. Terracotta pots, a string of low lights, a bowl of lemons that looks lifted from a market stall near the Arno. The twist is not a stunt, but a choice to make ordinary romance into the rebellion. They talk not about board votes and hostile whispers, but about their grandson and the way time is a thief that sometimes returns what it steals. Jack jokes that they should savor this quiet. Diane, with a look that says she knows exactly how long quiet tends to last, agrees. There's a gift at the end, a slim olive-wood pen carved from a tree cut down the year Jack was born with a nib that glides like forgiveness. The message writes itself. We are still allowed to compose beautiful sentences together, even when the rest of the world is yelling. Then the scene shifts back to Kane, who has put down his glass and picked up his phone. Again, he is not built to sit inside uncertainty. He cycles through numbers, toggles between anger and argument, searches for a string of words that will call his children out of silence. Next to the buzzing black rectangle, the stolen bottle glints. He wonders aloud, too low for Phyllis to hear, why she thought this was the night for a prize. Why she thought bringing him something he once wanted would help him refrain from demanding what he wants now. She doesn't try to answer. Instead, she addresses what she can affect: the temperature of the room. She speaks of deceleration. How, sometimes when a train roars toward a bend, the only clever move is to ease the throttle and survive the curve. The analogy lands well enough to keep him from detonating the moment. For now, that is the victory on offer. When she finally pulls her hand away from the bottle's neck, it is not a retreat, but a recalibration. She keeps her language simple, her posture neutral, the exit clean. No ultimatums, no last-minute gambits, no attempt to turn his warning into an opening. She has heard him. No partners, no crown. And yet, even as she accepts the terms, she files away the truth that matters most to her own survival. Kane has admitted they are similar. People who are similar can anticipate each other. Anticipation is a form of power. Left alone, Kane studies the bottle like a riddle. He hums the rhythm of his own warning, taste-testing the words that felt so right coming out of his mouth. Not partners, not queen. That kind of clarity can steady a man. It can also leave him lonelier than he expected to be on a night like this, when the only sound he wants is the chime that proves his children are alive and amused by his overprotective rage. He tries a different message, shorter, stripped of strategy. I'm here, that's it. He hits send and for the first time in hours doesn't immediately look for the reply. Across town, the gelato at Abbott Manor melts a little slower under the antique lights. Jack and Diane talk about tomorrow like it's an ally. She teases him for cutting the basil too big. He argues that rustic is a strategy. Their laughter is small and private, and the kind that lasts longer than it should because they both axe joy. Tonight they decline to pay. Genoa City ends its evening as it often does in a series of unresolved chords. Phyllis walks away without the crown will never offer, but with something she values more. A read on his rails and a reminder that she can step on and off the train without letting it define her destination. Kane remains a conductor who refuses co-pilots and a father who will not say the word afraid, not even to an empty room. And, at a long wooden table dressed up as Italy, two people who have learned how to weather storms choose the most subversive act available to them. They go to bed with their hearts quiet, but for now, tonight there is one truth sturdy enough to hold the whole city together. Boundaries were set, and for once the setting of them did. The day in Genoa City unfolds with escalating tensions and undercurrents of grief, power struggles, and quiet resilience. At the heart of the narrative is Phyllis Summers, who attempts to navigate the dangerous and unpredictable world controlled by Kane Ashby, a man who wields power through manipulation, intimidation, and covert alliances. Despite warnings and the growing threat Kane poses, Phyllis continues to engage him, hoping to influence his plans and blunt the potential damage. However, Kane's need for control and dominance reveals that he sees Phyllis not as a partner but as a tool to be used on command. Parallel to this, Daniel, Phyllis's son, watches closely and prepares for the inevitable fallout. He shifts from trying to persuade Phyllis to urging her toward clarity and self-preservation, recognizing that Kane's escalating tactics will only lead to disaster. This culminates in a tense confrontation in which Daniel physically intervenes to protect his mother, signaling a turning point where defense replaces negotiation. Amid this turmoil, life in Genoa City also reveals quieter moments of resistance and tenderness. At the Abbott estate, Diane Jenkins orchestrates an intimate Italian-themed evening with Jack Abbott, emphasizing the importance of finding peace and joy despite ongoing challenges. Nearby, Tessa, Claire, Daniel, and Holden gather to share their grief and losses, illustrating the communal nature of mourning and the subtle strength it provides. Kane's world, described metaphorically as a relentless, fast-moving train, contrasts sharply with the calm domestic scenes elsewhere in the city. Throughout, Phyllis balances on the edge of danger, wielding audacious strategies but ultimately rejecting the role Kane tries to impose on her. Kane, in turn, remains isolated by his refusal to accept vulnerability or partnership, embodying a solitary figure driven by control and fear masked as rage. The day closes with boundaries firmly set and alliances cautiously acknowledged. Phyllis walks away without the crown Kane refused to share but with a renewed understanding of her own agency. Kane remains a lone conductor of his turbulent domain, while Diane and Jack savor a rare, quiet peace. Though the conflicts remain unresolved, the day's events underscore the importance of standing firm, choosing tenderness over violence, and finding moments of calm amid chaos. A fragile but vital victory for Genoa City. Phyllis Summers tries to outmaneuver Kane, Ashby's dangerous plans but risks being used as a pawn. Daniel prepares for the worst, moving from persuasion to protection to shield his mother from Kane's escalating threats. Diane Jenkins creates a peaceful Italian-themed evening, symbolizing the choice to embrace calm amid chaos. Tessa, Claire, Daniel, and Holden share their grief, demonstrating the communal strength found in shared loss. Kane's world is a fast-moving, uncontrollable train, highlighting his relentless push for power and control. The confrontation between Kane, Phyllis, and Daniel marks a pivotal moment of resistance and boundary setting. The day ends with a quiet victory for Genoa City, boundaries set, tenderness chosen, and resilience affirmed. The complexity of power dynamics. Kane's manipulation of Phyllis illustrates how individuals in power often seek instruments rather than partners. His desire for unquestioning loyalty and control reveals a toxic dynamic where empathy is weaponized or rejected. Phyllis's eventual refusal to be merely useful signals a reclaiming of agency, highlighting the personal cost of navigating such relationships. Family as both a source of vulnerability and strength. Daniel's role shifts from observer to protector, underscoring the dual nature of family ties. While familial love can expose individuals to harm, it also fuels fierce defense and survival instincts. His intervention is not heroic spectacle but a deliberate act rooted in responsibility and love, reflecting the nuanced reality of family conflicts. Grief as a shared language. The scene with Tessa, Claire, Daniel, and Holden reveals how grief transcends individual pain and becomes a communal experience. Their conversation, marked by small personal details rather than platitudes, shows how connection and presence provide solace when healing is incomplete. A realistic portrayal of mourning's ongoing rhythm. Contrasting environments as narrative devices. The stark difference between the chaotic, high-stakes world of Kane and Phyllis and the serene domesticity of Diane and Jack serves to highlight the city's duality. This split screen reflects the broader human experience where moments of peace and turmoil coexist, each shaping the other. It also emphasizes that calm is a deliberate act of resistance rather than mere interlude. The metaphor of the train. Kane's operation as a train, moving fast and mercilessly, illustrates the inevitability and momentum of his plans. This metaphor captures the tension between speed and control, suggesting that once set in motion, some forces become unstoppable without deliberate intervention. Phyllis's ability to step on and off the train symbolizes the importance of knowing when to engage and when to withdraw for survival. The significance of boundaries. The day culminates with clear boundaries being established emotionally, strategically, and physically.